What is going on, everybody? My name is Kyle O'Grady. I am a thru hiker. I am a peak bagger. I am a huge hiking nerd. And every single week on this podcast, you know what we do. We chat with other thru hikers and other peak baggers and other hiking nerds about their experiences on the trail. And that is certainly what we did in this week's episode. Troy Zohner is on the podcast. And let me tell you, first of all, his trail name is Tomcat. This guy has done a ton of stuff, and that sounds like the most generic podcast intro thing to say, like, oh yeah, he's done like a ton of stuff. No, like, actually, this guy has done a ton of stuff, way more than I have, and it was really awesome to talk to him. We basically just jumped around and just tried to touch on as many different things as we could, because like I said, this man has a long hiking resume. It was really, really fun. I really appreciate Troy reaching out to me to make this happen. So Troy, thank you so much. We're going to get into the episode in just 1 second. First, I just want to say something to the folks who listen to this podcast quite frequently. You might have noticed that last week there was no episode, and I just got to say the next few weeks might be a little spotty as far as episodes go. Just some stuff has come up, and I just need a little bit of time off from the podcast. I'm still going to put out a couple episodes, but just bear with me. Things are going to get back to once a week very, very shortly. It's just going to be a few more weeks of potentially no episodes. We'll see what happens, but it's going to be all good, and I'm looking forward to getting back into things in, a few weeks. So thank you so much to everybody who listens to this podcast all the time. I seriously appreciate it. I don't say thank you enough to the folks who download this podcast every single week. I know there's a lot of you, and I'm very, very thankful for you. With that said, we're going to keep this intro short. We're going to get into the episode number 102 with Troy Zohner. Episode number 102 of Trail Tales. I am here today with a man named Troy Zohner. His trail name is Tomcat, and I think this is going to be fun. I'll be honest, I get a decent amount of I don't want to overstate that. I get some emails from folks who request to be guests on the show, and though I'm always flattered, I don't always take them up on it. Mostly if I don't really see anything jump out to me that sounds like interesting for me personally. Not to say that people who have emailed me before, they're not interesting or whatever, I'm too good for them. It's anything ridiculous like that. It's just if something kind of catches my eye, that's kind of when I take the bait. And Troy sent me an email, Tomcat sent me an email, and a bunch of things stuck out because he's done a bunch of really cool stuff. I think he's going to bring, as you said in the email, Troy, I think you're going to bring a bit of a different perspective to this episode, because Troy, as we're going to get into in a second, thru hiked the Appalachian Trail in 1999, which is a long time ago. So it's just a different perspective, and I have had people on the show who have hiked back then on previous episodes, but it's been a long time. So anyways, very long-winded introduction there. Troy, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for reaching out, and thanks for rescheduling. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I kind of, laid out some stuff there, but why don't I give you a chance to properly introduce yourself? Tell everybody who you are. I guess the cliff notes of what you've hiked, because there's a lot of stuff on this list I'm looking at. Just tell everybody who Tomcat is.
Yeah, well, like you said, I thru hiked in 99, and before that I have done a little bit of hiking, but that was my first real big hike. Other than that, it was a couple of overnighters and maybe weekend hikes, but nothing to that scale, obviously, before that. And then I actually had a couple of failed thru hikes after that, a shortened trip on the Colorado Trail in PCT, and stepped away for a little bit, but then I got back into it. I backpacked the Coos Trail in New Hampshire. That was kind of my first getting back into backpacking after a several-year absence and going to college in between. And then did a bunch of smaller trips into New England, the Grafton Loop, other trips into Whites that I kind of threw together on my own. Did the long trail, I think that was 2011. And then I moved to Colorado for a few years, and I did a bunch of trips out there. A lot of them were kind of my own manufacturing, mostly in Colorado, a little bit in other states around the area too. Most recently, I did the North Appalachian Trail this year and a bunch of smaller trips. A lot of them down in Pennsylvania, but the NPT was the bigger one that I did recently.
Mm.
And when I'm not doing the backpacking, I do a lot of peak bagging. I think I'm up to 38 on the Adirondack 46, probably in the mid 30s in New Hampshire, all of Vermont and Maine, and I've also done a bunch of the 14ers and a bunch more 13ers when I lived out in Colorado.
You are a certified hiking nerd, dude. You've done that's a lot of stuff. I love to hear that, honestly.
Well, if you've been in it for 25 plus years, you get around over time.
Yeah. Can I ask you how old you are?
43.
43. So you're not even like old either. Like that's a very impressive hiking resume, I will say. And I think it's interesting because you've done stuff, like a decent amount of stuff, both here in the East and out West as well. And that kind of sparks my interest, honestly, because as most people know listening, I'm primarily an East Coast hiker. I don't know, primarily, like that's nonsense. I am an East Coast hiker. I've basically never done anything out West. But even today, actually, I was starting to scheme a little bit and do some research on getting out West a little bit next year. Nothing, really big. No PCTs or CDTs, unfortunately. But I do want to get out there and do some hiking, just with my vacation time and stuff.
Yeah, it's a different world out there, and I haven't hiked both. I definitely have to say I'm more of a West Coast guy, but hiking in the Northeast, it kind of prepares you for hiking anywhere, really.
Yeah, I can believe that for sure. I'm really kind of intrigued at what you just said there, that you kind of prefer the West Coast, because it seems like, at least based on what you just talked about there, a slight majority of what you've done has been East Coast.
Yeah, it has been.
And so, and you're there, you're settled, here right now.
Right.
You said you live in the Adirondacks, which is awesome. So I guess if you prefer West Coast, why are you here right now?
Well, my other half, we're from the East Coast, and she definitely prefers the East Coast. We lived in Maine for a while, and coming back to the East Coast, the Adirondacks look a lot like Maine, so that was kind of what brought us back.
Mm-hmm. I gotcha. That's an interesting comparison to the Adirondacks versus Maine. And now that I think about it, when I was going through the 100-mile wilderness on the AT, like right at the very end of the trail, obviously, I remember thinking to myself, like, this kind of reminds me of like some sections of the Northfield Placid Trail that I had done before, just because the 100-mile is relatively flat and it's like a lot of lakes and rivers and stuff, and that's a pretty close comparison to the Adirondacks. But anyways, dude, there's so much here. I don't even know where to like go next. Let's see. Actually, I had one thought based on something you said earlier. You said that after kind of taking a break from hiking for a while, you jumped back in with the Cohos Trail, yeah?
Yep, up in New Hampshire, the Cohos.
So my only knowledge of that trail is from previous episodes of this podcast, and as people know, I have a hard time pronouncing that stupid name of that trail, but Cohos, I think I got it now. It only took me like 3 episodes, but anyways.
Yeah, a lot of people get confused with that, because it looks like it's like whatever the northern county in New Hampshire is, I think it's spelled C-O-O-S.
Yes.
I think that's the historical spelling. It looks like Cohos, though, and when you see it written down.
It just doesn't make any sense, but...
Right.
Anyways, so from what I know about that trail, from my limited knowledge at least, it seems like that's a pretty gnarly trail. Like, obviously, parts of it are in the White Mountains, but then outside of that, it seems like it's a pretty remote trail. It seems like it'd be a tough one to kind of jump back into with. So can you just kind of talk about your experience there a little bit? Like, was it a tough hike for you?
It was a little bit. Like I said, I've been out of the game for a while, so to speak, for long distance hiking. And I actually, before I did the Cohos, I added on the Northern Prezi Traverse. So I went from, I forget the name, Appalachian Trailhead right outside of Gorham, and I hiked to Mount Monroe, and then hiked down to the actual start of it. So it actually was a 185-mile trip. So to make it worse, I did that with extra gnarly section of trail there. But I started at the southern end. It's right below Crawford Notch area.
Mm-hmm.
It follows, I believe it's the Davis Path that goes up toward Mount Isolation.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah,
and then it drops back down into I think it's a dry river up to Mount Eisenhower, and then it goes over, I think it's Wallbeak and Cabot Mountain, the other 4,000 footers up there. And after that, it gets into some remote territory in the northern part of New Hampshire where you don't really see a whole lot of people up there. But it kind of has that feel of the Northville Placid Trail, actually, when you get up in that northern section. You get some mountains, but a lot of it stays low where you're going near a lot of lakes and rivers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Was it hard? Did you think it was a hard one to jump kind of back into it? Because that's what it kind of sounds like from talking to other people. I also remember a lot of people saying that it was like super remote. There was a lot of like snowmobile and ATV trails and stuff like that. Sometimes maybe the trail wasn't super easy to follow.
At times the trail is pretty tough. When I did it, it was 2009, and it was still a relatively new trail.
Oh, so man, it must have been even worse back then, eh?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of sections that were well tracked, and you get into that northern part where you're on ATV trails and snowmobile trails. A lot of times there's no real marking. You're just going by the guidebook and following directions. And you get into some thick areas where you would basically see animal paths, and you couldn't differentiate always, and you hoped you're on the right path. Eventually it would break out into a better defined trail and you'd be on the right path. But at times it definitely was a challenge more for the navigation aspect of it. And because it was on a lot of those snowmobile trails in the summertime, they go through some swampy areas, so they're wet a lot of the time. But I was blessed on that trip. I believe I was out for 8 straight days, and I didn't have a single drop of rain.
Oh, damn.
Hard to come by in the Northeast.
I was going to say, that's pretty lucky for sure.
The trail was pretty wet even without that because it rained pretty heavy right before I started, so I had wet feet a lot, but just the fact that you don't have rain, it's a big morale booster compared to hiking in the rain for a couple of days. So I think that was a big help for my hike and getting in my right mindset that hike.
Were there any shelters on that trail back then? Because I'm pretty sure there are a couple now, and I'm more referring to the section that's like north of the White Mountain National Forest trails.
There was one that I remember. I believe it was called Baldface or Baldhead Shelter up in the northern half. Mm-hmm. I believe they have built more since, though.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm pretty sure there's like a couple now. I was poking around on the website a while back.
There's a few in the White Mountain National Forest too in the southern end. One of the dry rivers, I believe, but they're in pretty rough shape down in that part.
Yeah, that trail's like on my list of thru hikes I want to do, but it's not like high on my list. And I'm just coming to this realization now because, like I said, I'm kind of like trying to scheme for what I'm going to do next year. And I want to go for at least one like longer, quote, longer hike. I say longer as in like, 200, less than 200 miles still, but longer than just like a weekend or whatever.
Right.
And like, that's an obvious one that jumped out to me, but then I was like, something about it. Like I'm not like super inclined to do it, but I do want to do it eventually. So, maybe I need to learn how to pronounce it first, but
well, I think it's pretty common, mispronunciation. But if you do hike it, I recommend later half of the summer into fall, just because I think that northern section would be brutal with bugs if you go
I'm sure
sooner than August.
For sure. I feel like you can make that recommendation for just about any trail in the Northeast
in general.
But I mean, it doesn't make it any less true. Have you been back to the AT for like, more than maybe just like a couple miles here and there since your thru hike in 1999?
Within a couple years of my thru hike, I did a fair amount in Shenandoah National Park. Then, living in Pennsylvania, I hiked a lot. I grew up right outside of the Port Clinton area, if you remember that part of the trail.
Oh, yeah.
So I hiked that area a bit before I left the state. And then most of New England, I should say most of New Hampshire and Maine, I hiked a lot of that again since the AT thru hike. Okay, cool. So I'm just trying to gauge, I guess, if you've had enough experience on it since then. And I guess you don't really have to be on like the AT to kind of understand and I don't know, just kind of observe how things have changed since 1999. So this is a conversation I believe
I'm not even going to try to remember what episode number it was, but with a Kristen Gardella, I believe her name was.
Yep, I'd actually heard that episode of yours.
Yeah, okay, cool. So you probably remember more from that episode than I do, because it was a while. It was at least a year ago, I want to say. But I think she had hiked in, I think it might have been 1999, honestly.
Yeah, it was. I think I passed her briefly.
No
she was
way.
Always
That's awesome.
Her dad was with her, I believe.
Yes.
And I always saw their name in the register. They were always just a step ahead of me, and I finally passed them up by the Crockers, and I think I finished the day before them.
Oh, that's so crazy. Wow, I'm going to have to send her a message and tell her to listen to this episode, because that's really funny. I'll be honest, I don't remember the specifics of what we talked about, so I might end up asking you some of the same questions. I probably will that I asked her, but I'm still curious about it. Because I was 3 at the time, so I obviously it goes without saying, Kyle, of course I didn't know anything about hiking back then, so
yeah, right.
I guess we can go obvious differences, we can go subtle differences, things that people might not have thought about, but let's just start with some of the big ones, I guess. I don't know, very general question: how have things changed in terms of the trail culture since then?
I can't speak completely for the trail culture. To me, it seemed like it was pretty busy back when I hiked.
Just from your observations, obviously. You don't speak for everybody.
Yeah, it seemed like the trail culture was pretty strong back then. I know at that episode you talked with, I forget her real name,
Kristen.
Christina, I think it was. She was saying that there wasn't as much trail magic and the towns weren't as inviting, but I found them pretty inviting. There was still occasional trail magic, but maybe it was just we were grateful for it because it was when we had it. I definitely know the numbers have gotten a lot worse as far as number of hikers each year.
Oh yeah.
when I lived in Maine, I lived within an hour of Millinocket, so I would go up to Katahdin quite a bit, and you get in there in August, September, the number of people on the summit, it was just huge compared to when you would do it when I did it back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that traffic, I feel has just came from the past few years too, which is...
Yeah, I know I believe they have quotas up there now on how many people can go into back there at the Birches.
Yeah.
Last lean to.
Mm-hmm. How heavy was your pack back then?
Well, my pack by itself, it was a low alpine. It was a 90 plus 10 liter.
Oh my God.
I think it weighed about 6 pounds on its own. And I had relatively light gear for the time. Otherwise, my tent was sub 3 pound, my sleeping bag was sub 3 pound.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a lot of luxury items. I know biggest concern when I started was my horrible planning of food drops. So out of the gate, I started with 10 days worth of food. So that gave me 52 pounds of pack weight right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
So, but generally I probably had under 30 pounds most of the time, even with a full meal, a fresh meal drop.
Yeah.
So, it was heavy, but it wasn't...
That's not, ridiculously heavy, though, That's honestly not as heavy as, I might just assume, based on a very, little amount of knowledge. But I kind of would have assumed that that would have been heavier than that, to be honest. Because, it's still, very common, obviously, today to see people with packs in that weight range. So... It's honestly, would you say that your pack was on the lighter side for the time, or was there still plenty of people that were kind of rocking that weight range back then?
It was probably on the average side, I would say. There was definitely, as you get north of, obviously, the people who have the 70-pound packs, they kind of thin out by injury and things like that, just because they can't keep up that pace forever. But you had some people that were... everybody would count their weight, but it's not like it is today where it's almost like the priority to backpacking, it seems. In some instances.
Definitely. It seems like that.
And I'm still not rocking the lightweight equipment. I shouldn't say I'm not rocking ultralight. I have trying to think of my pack now that I'm using off the top of my head, a Deuter. It's a Deuter ACT 65 plus 10. And it's a couple-year-old model. It's sub 4 pounds by a couple ounces. But my base without going ultralight is still in the probably 13 to 14 pound range. It's still fairly light considering my gear isn't ultralight.
Yeah, especially for, a comparison of back then too, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten a little better with my food planning, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that makes a big difference too. We talked a little bit about crowds and seeing other people out there and stuff, but I'm just curious because I feel like on my thru hike when I was in the sections where I was seeing the most people, and I'm just going to say the most other thru hikers or like long distance backpackers, not going to count, just day hikers or whatever. I want to say this is kind of an estimation, but I want to say I was seeing like at least like 10 other thru hikers a day, sometimes more. How does that compare to your estimation, obviously, of what you were seeing back then?
I started in the thick of it. I know you kind of started your hike later than most people, but I started March 21st. So it was in the prime time for hikers. And you get to the first week into not the first week, but the first maybe couple hundred miles where you get through the Smokies. It was still consistently pretty busy. But I would say after I got through probably past Damascus, it wasn't uncommon for me to have a campsite or shelter myself or maybe one other thru hiker. Mm-hmm. And then by the time I got to New England, I mean, it was pretty common to get a night or two by yourself every week.
Damn, that's crazy. I feel like that is just not common or not normal, even possible, unless you're hiking in the winter these days. Because as I've probably said in previous episodes, but I think the only nights I ever spent by myself were when I was stealth camping away from a shelter and I was like intentionally staying by myself or whatever. I don't think I ever spent a night at a shelter by myself completely, and I can only think of maybe one time where I stayed at a shelter and it was just me and like my crew of a couple people there and nobody else showed up.
Yeah, once I got past Gorham, basically, I think I had majority of the nights like just to myself, or maybe one of the person that was hiking with me. It was very rare that you had many people. The exception was if you got to when I got to 100 Mile Wilderness, on the weekend there'd be some groups in there just because it was kind of a popular, that's like a section hike. But generally I had the trail to myself, the shelters and campsites to myself.
And yeah, I mean, there's always going to be some, variety if it's a weekend or a popular section of the trail, but still that's just like a foreign concept to me. It sounds kind of nice, but also kind of not nice because I like to see some people. I always feel like such a baby when I say this because it's like literally just trying to take the best of both worlds, but I like to see some people, but I don't like to see too many people. So I feel like there's probably too many people now for my preference. But I feel like it probably would have been too little back then. So I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. I mean, I think a lot of people nowadays, I don't know if it's necessarily people are coming out to hike for the wilderness experience, which is kind of hard to get the true wilderness experience in the AT, but I felt like I could still get that a little bit back then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's crazy to think about, yeah, because not the case today. Unless you go in the winter. If you want the wilderness experience on the AT, you can still get it. It's just going to be during the winter, which I do not recommend at all because you'll probably freeze to death. Yeah, especially, up here at least anyways. So don't do that unless you're a trained winter professional. How about the towns and stuff? So you mentioned that, I guess we talked about it, my episode with Kristen. Yeah, so towns, were there like hiker service? I mean, obviously there's still stores and stuff, but I'm just curious if there were services back then that were catering to thru hikers specifically, even back in 1999, or if that was a normal thing back then. Like, I don't fucking know. Can you talk about that a little bit?
A lot of the trail towns that you went to, like back in the day, Damascus and Hot Springs, they were still pretty popular trail towns. I think Trail Days was going on back then already. So those were still catering to hikers pretty well and had a lot of accommodations specifically for the thru hikers. When you get into other places, there was still a lot of hostels. It seemed, I don't know how they are now, but they were like attached to like the churches in the area might have a spare room or a spare rec room or something where they would allow hikers to sleep at night. Things like that. But I don't think you would go more than a week without a hostel somewhere close to the trail. It seemed like if you had a mail drop, there was a chance you would have a hostel in one of those towns.
Mm-hmm. We're doing mail drops a lot more common for resupply back then, because now you can basically do the whole trail without doing mail drops, at least for your food anyways.
Well, it's kind of funny. The planning of the trail is a whole different monster back then than it was now. So when I hiked the trail, the internet, I guess it was around, but it wasn't like everybody had easy access. I believe I called the ATC and got a catalog from them to order the guides and things like that. And I ordered this. It was basically a workbook on how to plan an AP thru hike.
Damn, that's crazy.
And it had like basically a list of different towns with post offices and towns that had better stores and things like that. But as far as I knew, I mean, the only way you could really plan it pre-trip was by doing mail drops. Once you got on the trail, though, you found it wasn't as necessary. And there were still a lot of people who would essentially go town to town and just buy their food as they went. But it seemed like there was more, I'm assuming more mail drops than there were now, because it was almost mandatory back then.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would have hated that because I don't like doing mail drops, but I should probably suck it up because I'm going to have to in some future hikes, no doubt.
Well, the one good thing about that was it would give me an excuse to take a Zero or Nero, because otherwise I would just truck right through.
Yeah, if you get caught up at the post office with their shitty hours or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Maybe I should do more mail drops. I don't know. Probably
well,
not.
It gets expensive too doing it that way.
Yeah.
But, especially if you're like shipping to the PCT or something like that, because from the East Coast.
Yeah, definitely. Were you sending mail drops like while you were on trail, or did you? Don't tell me you did them all before you left.
No,
I've seen people do that before. That's fucking insane. Like, damn.
What I did was I had my list of towns where I wanted to do the mail drops, and again I was not planning very well. Like I said in the beginning, I had 10 days of food and a couple of mail drops, and there were like 9-10 days of food at a time, which was insane packs after the town. But I actually had all my mail drops packed out ahead of time, and my dad would send them to me I'd like call him a couple weeks ahead of time and say, I'm going to be wherever, and can you send this date? So I didn't have them all sent ahead of time, but I had them all pre-packed, and there was very little change in those mail drops.
That's crazy. You must have gotten so sick of the food you packed, didn't you?
To be honest, I didn't. I mean,
What?
I was one of those guys, though, that dumped a lot of food at the hiker boxes, so there's probably a lot of people who came and cleaned up my leftovers along the way.
Damn, that's impressive. I cannot imagine getting a bunch of mail drops, even if you didn't send them out like together.
Yeah,
before,
if I
like
did
that.
it again, I definitely won't be as heavy on the mail drops as it was back then.
Oh yeah, but it's like I'm not. Yeah, like obviously, like you got to do what you got to do, but like just that's crazy because I've seen, or I guess more so heard about people who have prepped their entire trail, or an entire trail's worth of mail drops like that. And like I know in some situations, like you kind of have to if you have like a special diet or if you're hiking a trail that you really have to be on your shit when it comes to planning like that. But freaking A, that sounds like such a pain in the ass. That sounds terrible.
I think back then you just didn't know any better because resources were so limited compared to today.
Yeah, exactly. Damn, dude, that's crazy as hell. I'm kind of curious about one of the lines in your email you wrote here. If you ever want to see how life changes 20 plus years after a thru hike, feel free to contact me. Now, I'm usually not the one to go into like the deep philosophical questions and reflections and all that stuff. But that did kind of stick out to me a little bit. Because, we've talked a little bit about how the trail has changed or just, some of the differences back then. What did you mean by see how life changes 20 plus years after a thru hike?
I'm not saying that life necessarily changes, but just see how it kind of 20 years later, it's still such a deep part of your life, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to this day, I mean, it's definitely one of the highlights of my life 21 years later now. And you would think, I know a lot of people would be on the trail as like their one and done deal, but it's one of those things, it's hard to take it out of your system. I mean, 20 plus years later, it's still an obsession, not necessarily the AP, but just going online and reading all the gear reviews, reading Backpacker, looking at YouTube videos and all this stuff. And you think 20 years later you would kind of slide by, but it gets in your system pretty good.
What's the, actually, no, I got a better question than what I was just going to ask. I guess watching the explosion of the popularity of backpacking and social media and YouTube and all these podcasts and stuff like that. I'm curious, like, how it makes you feel, because I feel like sometimes, and I hate to admit this, but I'm gonna do it. Sometimes, not so much anymore, but maybe like a little bit in 2018 when I hiked. I almost felt a very very entitled, which is ridiculous, sense of just like, I've known about through hiking and backpacking longer than a lot of these people out here, which is probably true, but also kind of the way I was thinking about it was kind of douchey. But I'm just curious what you think about that, because I mean, you through hiked way, way, way before most people that are into it now. We're through hiking or even just backpacking. Again, with the explosion of YouTube and social media and all this stuff. So, I don't know. Do you ever feel like, maybe not even in a bad way, but just like you could admit it if it's the case, it's okay. Just like, I knew about this before it was cool or trendy or anything like that. And I know it's kind of a stupid question, but I'm just curious.
I guess to an extent, I shouldn't say I'm like angry about the explosion of the stuff, but it's kind of like you said. I mean, I've been at it a long time, and you get frustrated that there's so many people in your territory now. But I mean, Everybody was a newbie at the beginning, so I mean, the next generation is staying on the trail. That's what keeps the trails maintained and so forth. So it's not entirely a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to look at it for sure. Let's see here. How is it living? You don't got to say where exactly you live if you don't want to, but how is it living in the Adirondacks? That's two guests in a row, by the way, who live in the Adirondacks, which is kind of cool.
Well, it's nice to have. I'll tell you where I live, in Tupper Lake, so I'm pretty well in the center of the Adirondacks here. Gotcha. It's good and bad. It's nice to have such a mass amount of wilderness right outside your doorstep, but coming from Colorado, where it was so sunny and nice all the time, it's kind of a drag when you get the days where, especially this time of year, where you have 3 weeks of clouds and you want to get out, but you have no visibility and things like that. But it's definitely nice having so many lakes and mountains all basically right out your back door.
Good old Tupper Lake. I've been there a number of times, but I haven't really actually stopped anywhere there except for the McDonald's multiple times. But it's like, I don't know. I don't really know too much about it. Besides that, like, really bizarre, like, building that I was told once, which I don't know if this is true, but I was told it was used to be like a hospital, like a big hospital. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Is it the white building right as you come into town?
I think so. If you're coming from the east side, I don't remember what the road is. 30 maybe.
It was an old, I believe it was an old veterans hospital, and now I think it caters to special needs people, but I'm not 100% sure. I've only lived here a couple years, so I don't know all the ins and outs of town.
I remember that. I remember there's, oh God, I don't need to go into this, but anyways, good old Tupper Lake. It's pretty close to where I went to school too, in Potsdam, which is pretty cool.
I go to Potsdam pretty regularly. It's the closest place with real amenities.
Oh, come on. Tupper Lake's got McDonald's, like I said.
Yeah.
Maybe like a Kenny Drugs or two, a grocery store.
Yeah.
I feel like this, what can Tupper Lake not have that Potsdam has? I mean, Potsdam's like a tiny town too.
Mostly if you need to go to a Walmart or something like that. I needed tires, so I was up there for that.
Okay, that's fair.
Just a little cheaper up there.
Oh, I know that Walmart. I shopped at that Walmart for 4 years when I was in college. Good times. It's one of the best Walmarts ever. Anyways, kind of back on track here. Let me ask you this. This might be a tough question to answer, so just do your best. But on previous episodes of the show, pretty old episodes of the show, honestly, but I've mentioned it a number of times, I feel like there's this weird difference between the Adirondacks and the Whites that I can't quite put my finger on, because they are very similar places, obviously. But I've always felt like there's like a slight difference in like maybe the culture or the people, but it might not be either. You've hiked a little bit in both places. So just anything that I just said there, does anything resonate at all? Like, can you just kind of talk about maybe some of the differences between the two places that you've experienced?
Yeah, I definitely feel just from what I've been there, I've never lived in the Whites, but it seems that has more of a culture based on mountain sports like the hiking and so forth, whereas the Adirondacks, I think it has more of a hiking fishing culture as well. And I think that might be part of it. I definitely think the trails, I know it's not saying much, but I almost think the trails are almost better in the Whites compared to the Adirondacks. And it's the hiking there in general. It seems like the culture is more widespread. To me, I lived in Pennsylvania and never really knew much about the Adirondacks, but I always knew about the Whites, and I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah, see, that's like that intrigues me too, because I live in a weird area over here in Vermont because it's like I'm so close to both areas. But if I wasn't literally right up against the Adirondacks, as in like can see them from the place that I live almost, I feel like I probably would have gravitated towards the Whites too, and maybe that's just a New England thing. Like obviously the Whites are in New England, so I don't know. It is. I don't know what it is. It's interesting. I feel like I just end up like just like spitting out a bunch of nonsense whenever I try to talk about this because I don't actually know what the hell I'm saying. But there's just something. There's just a difference there. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it exactly because there are so many similarities too. I don't know.
And I agree. There is definitely a difference, and I don't think I can quite pinpoint it either. I don't know if the people that come to the Adirondacks, it almost seems like it's a New York pride thing versus
it is. It definitely
White Mountains is just a minor culture difference that makes a difference. Yeah,
definitely. So you mentioned at the beginning that you hiked the Northville Placid Trail this year, or I guess last year now. We got to talk about that a little bit because I mean, obviously, like Flossie and I hiked it this year, did a couple episodes on it. When did you hike the NPT?
I did it in the beginning of September this year.
So you were probably only like a couple weeks behind, or ahead of us rather.
You just did it this year?
Yeah, we hiked. It was like late September into the first couple days of October.
Okay, yeah.
Which direction did you go?
I started in the south, so went northbound. Yeah.
And it seems like most people do it that direction for some reason. I've really only heard of like a couple people, obviously more than a couple people have done it southbound, but I've only heard of a couple people who have gone southbound. And I don't really know exactly why that is. I haven't really thought about it too much, but maybe just the fact that you start in town if you start northbound. I
almost think it's kind of a tradition thing, almost like the AT.
Yeah.
There's far more people hiking northbound. I believe it just had to do with the original trail because people would take the train to Northville and then hike north and then take the train back. But I think it's more of a tradition thing.
I think so. I think that's like definitely like what it is. Because I just said, oh, maybe you start in town, but you kind of start in town if you go southbound as well. So
yeah,
that don't matter. How was your NPT experience? And be honest, because I don't know if you listened to our previous episode or watched my video, but
crapping on it pretty good with that one guy.
Yeah, we we didn't have the best time. It wasn't terrible. I look back on it fondly, but it wasn't the best. That wasn't the best hike. So yeah, was it better for you? How did you like that trail?
I enjoyed it. I started it in. The first day I started, it was supposed to be kind of borderline day with showers. Well, it ended up being showers all day and everything was soaked. Second day, it wasn't much better. So I was cursing the trail after the first 2 days because, it's a wet trail to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, the weather cleared up nicely. I had beautiful weather for the rest of the trip, and I couldn't have asked for a better time the last 3/4 of the trail. So, I really enjoyed it.
That's like the exact opposite of us. Like we started in nice weather and then it was just all downhill from there, buddy.
The first 2 days I was cursing it pretty good, but after that I got just a very peaceful, serene woods experience. You couldn't ask for anything better after that.
The bugs must have not been too bad if you're in September, yeah?
Yeah, the one, I think it's Cedar River Flow. It was the name of the little lake there, right before you get to Wakely. It was getting by nightfall, it was getting a little mosquito-y, but it was very minor. That was the only real bugs, and it was maybe 20 minutes of my time before I went in the tent for the night.
So nice. So it's not bad at all.
Not a real problem. So I lucked out on that aspect, and even with the rain that I had the first couple of days, it was a couple of real high, clear, dry days, and by then the mud was minimal the rest of the trip, so it was just, if you can spend that time in the woods and weather is like that, you can't complain.
No, definitely not. I think I'm coming to the conclusion that the first 2-ish weeks of September is like the best time to hike the NPT. In the past, I've said like fall, like just fall is the best time, but I'm really going to narrow it down to those first couple weeks in September because it's like, it's still the summer, so you're not going to get, I guess you could get some cold nights, but you're probably not going to see like nights down in like the 20s.
Right.
Realistically, you probably might not even see any nights in the 30s because I only saw a couple nights in the 30s and I did it at the end of the month. But you're not going to get like the bugs, or not as bad anyways. Right. You might have a little bit more than you would if you went at the end of the month like I did, but it's still not going to be that bad. You'll get some leaves, maybe. Depends on the year a little bit, but you might not get as many, but it'll still be pretty. So I think the first 2 weeks in September are the way to go in terms of like time of year to hike that trail.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would say the middle couple weeks, because there was barely any leaf color when I went, but by the time I got up to the northern end, there was a few patches here and there, but I think I would have liked to see these leaves. It would have been about 2 weeks out for me if I waited out.
Yeah, we definitely got some good leaves. I think we were just a little bit behind it, honestly, because by the end we were like kind of post-holing through leaves, which it wasn't that big a deal, honestly.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go after the leaves fall either, because like you said, I think a couple places the trail would be a little tricky to follow where it gets leaf cover on the ground.
Mm-hmm. How many people did you see out that time of year?
Generally, I would see at least a thru hiker or two. The middle section wasn't too busy. When I got up to Long Lake, it was Labor Day weekend.
Oh, yikes.
So Long Lake was pretty busy in that area. And then that whole stretch along the Cold River was some people out for the weekend type backpacking trips. But once I got past, I forget the Duck Hole, I didn't really see more than a couple people every few miles. I mean, there's people out, but it wasn't overwhelming.
Yeah. Dude, you hiked the Long Trail. I haven't talked about that trail in so long on this podcast now. Did I hear you say you hiked it in 2011?
Yeah, I think that was the year. And I don't know if you remember, but did you live in Vermont back then?
Hurricane Irene, that's what you were going to say.
It was a month after Irene, and the trail was just so saturated.
Oh, damn, yeah.
Down by somewhere in the area around Killington, I remember there was a long stretch of trail that was just wiped out by a creek that flooded and just washed out the trail tread along the edge of the trail, off the edge of the creek. But that whole trip, even a month after Irene, the ground was really saturated still. To make matters worse, it rained, I believe. I was on the trail 10 days. I did 190 miles, I believe. I had to call it quits after I got through Killington just because it just rained and rained and rained that whole trip. I think it probably rained about 6 inches while I was out those 10 days. So I just couldn't keep my feet dry, and I ended up getting not as bad as year-long trail foot experience that I heard about, but it still was pretty rough. They were pretty raw by the time I got to Killington, and the next day it just rained again, and I had to call it quits when I got to whatever that road crossing is near the Rutland Airport.
Clarendon, whatever that road is.
Yeah.
Just a little bit north of like Killington, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to like it, but I just, the weather wasn't on my side, and that made all the difference.
Yeah, oh bro, you didn't even see the best part either.
Yeah, I had like one day of, I went southbound, so I had like maybe one day up at Jay Peak.
Oh, you went southbound?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
so
you did see. Yeah, you did see the best part. Well,
what little bit I could see, I saw a little bit up around the top of Smuggler's Notch, and Jay Peak was clear, but the rest of it was pretty much pea soup and in the rain, so I didn't see much.
Damn. That's too bad. Damn, you did like a good chunk of it then. I guess in theory, technically you have hiked the whole trail then too, because...
Well, I did end to end it technically, just not in one trip. I did the northern 190 miles. I made it past Killington and Main Junction, so I did the other part when I did through hike, so I have hiked all of it, just not in one go. Yeah, and for everybody listening, just in case you're not familiar with what we're talking about there, the AT and the Long Trail coincide for the southern like 100-ish miles. And so because he quit after the spot, because he went southbound, he quit after the spot where the two trails link, it's like technically he has hiked the whole trail. So and I will say that
as someone who's pretty damn familiar with that trail, the northern section is more fun in my opinion. Anyways, that being said, it sounds like it wasn't it wasn't very fun for you, especially in 2011. So for everybody listening, I'm probably not the best person to talk about this because this happened before I was into hiking and I was still pretty young. So I honestly don't remember that much from it. I was doing stupid, like, fucking, what was I? I was in high school at this point, stupid high school shit. But in 2011, people call it Hurricane Irene. I don't know if it was I'm pretty sure it technically wasn't a hurricane by the time it hit us in Vermont. But we just got ravaged by this storm, and other places got hit too. Obviously, it wasn't like just Vermont for some reason, but Vermont got hit pretty hard, and that definitely just messed up a lot of rivers, and there's a lot of flooding, a lot of damage. And so the fact that you hiked so shortly after that, I wish I remembered that time period more. I wish I remembered what it was like more than I do, because I could probably come up with some better questions. But you kind of alluded to it briefly there. Was the trail pretty damn destroyed from it still, or was it kind of spotty? Can you just kind of talk about that a little bit?
Well, the trail never really recovered as far as I know it's a muddy trail to begin with, but it was still in that muddy state after the trail.
Freaking brutal. What time of year were you hiking?
It was, I want to say, the last week of September going into October.
Okay.
So when you'd go up the ski slopes, I believe it was on Jay Peak, and even up that far north, it would just slosh under your feet, even though it was a dry weather, just because there was that much rain there. And then the only place the trail was truly out of whack was down, I think it was just north of Killington. It's been a while, so I don't remember exactly. There was a stretch that was actually closed for a month by the Forest Service, and that had just reopened right before I went out on the trip. But there is a river, a creek that the trail flowed along, traveled along, and there was a whole section of it that was the tread was completely wiped out, and there's just cairns marking the route at that point.
Oh, geez.
So you were hoping you could see cairn to cairn through this place where the trail used to go.
I'm pretty sure I know the area you're talking about too, because in 2013, when I hiked down there in that pretty close to where you quit, I'm pretty sure, if we're thinking of the same area, down near Killington, there was a roadwalk detour, and this was in 2013, so a couple of years later, but still relatively close. But then when I went through, and actually I can't remember if it was fixed by 2016. It was definitely fixed by 2018 though, because I remembered hiking through there and being I'm pretty sure this just mile little stretch here or whatever I've never done before, which is kind of interesting because it's a long trail. But that's crazy. I wish I remembered more from that time period, honestly, because that was just before I started to get into hiking.
Yeah, and I think even without
go ahead.
Yeah, without that extra rain that fell during my hike, it probably wouldn't have been a big deal. But it was literally every day a pouring rain. I remember going over the Breadloaf Wilderness area, and it was temperatures in the mid 30s and just driving rain, and it just wore on me after so long. And then my feet by the probably about the 150 mile mark were getting unbearable, and then just a couple more days of rain. My feet were hamburger at that point. I just couldn't go on without taking at least a week off.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's a wet trail to begin with anyways, and then throw in all the complications from that. I mean, you still hiked the majority of the trail, and you still hiked a freaking hard-ass section of it too.
Yeah, and I was going for a 2-week pace for the whole trail, and I was on that pace, but just with the wet feet, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's a hard trail to do in 2 weeks. Fucking
yeah. I mean, I had the time.
It's been
to
done,
do it.
But it's hard.
Yeah,
it's real hard. I don't think I could do it in 2 weeks. That's for sure. Maybe someday. Probably not. Probably not. Let's see here. We haven't talked about the Colorado Trail yet. Another trail I don't really know much about this trail other than just what's been talked about on the show, obviously. But that's a very popular trail, obviously. That's a very famous trail, one that I get told I should hike very often by people in my comment section. So how can you just talk about that trail a little bit?
Yeah, I haven't hiked the entire Colorado Trail. The biggest stretch I did at one point, there's actually a stretch that's called the Collegiate Loop. It's 160 miles roughly. It starts on the Twin Lakes to Salida section. And the one part you hike on the Colorado Trail, and then you loop up the other side on the CDT. So it's a 160-mile loop going around the Collegiate Peak Wilderness, which is just a beautiful area. You're surrounding the densest concentration of 14ers out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I also hiked from the start in the eastern side, or the northern side, I guess, up by Denver, or down to Twin Lakes, which is another 165-mile stretch, and a little bit around the Weminuche Wilderness. But it is a stunning trail. There's just a huge section of it that travels above tree line. So you get these, I know you hike tree line in Mount Mansfield and Presidential Range and stuff like that, but it's nothing like you see out west. It's just thousands of feet above tree line and just endless views of more alpine mountains. It's just a stunning trail. But yeah, the trail itself, it's almost 500 miles long, going from Denver down toward Durango. And the first part, it stays relatively low, but as you get further west, there's long stretches where you're above tree line, particularly on the part that coincides with the CDT.
Can I ask you about that? Because, and I've asked this question before, but to other people that have done this trail, but as people know, my regular listeners probably know exactly what I'm about to say, but lightning, that's the thing that scares me the most about Colorado or just out west in general. Can you talk about the lightning on the trail,
Sure.
your experiences with it?
Yep, especially since I lived out in Colorado and hiked 14ers and stuff like that regularly. I'm pretty well acclimated with or acquainted with the lightning.
Okay.
But every day in the summer, you get the monsoon season, and you generally want to be off the mountain by midday because the clouds start to build, and like clockwork, you'll get these afternoon thunderstorms, and you'll see this one cumulus cloud 50 miles away, and it'll usually, more often than not, develop into a thunderstorm at high elevation. And when you're up at 14,000 feet, you have several thousand feet below you before you get back into the tree line, and there's not really anywhere to go without any hits.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a real threat out there if you want to be careful when you're out. Probably, I'd say about beginning of July to the end of August.
So it's like when you're, well, that's good that it's not like, that long of a time period, but it's like when that kind of is though. It's like prime summer. Anyways, when you're just doing a day hike up a 14er or whatever, I feel like it'd be relatively easy to avoid it because, again, just be off the peak by noon, like everybody says. But when you're through hiking on the Colorado Trail, for instance, it's like you can't always just, and I remember I had this exact conversation with my boy Hell Yeah Jesus a long time ago, because he through hiked the Colorado Trail, and I remember I asked him pretty much the same question. It's like, how do you deal with the lightning when you're backpacking or through hiking like that? Because chances are you're not going to be turning around because you're on one path. You got to go a certain direction. Chances are you can't always plan to be on the exposed stretches or off the exposed stretches by noon, because you got to make your miles and stick to your pace and stuff. So I don't know. Right. How do you mitigate the risk in that regard?
What I would always try to start hiking as close as you can to sunrise, if you get up at 5 o'clock or sometime around whatever, depending on the time of the year, and just go from there. And when you get over that noon o'clock time and you see clouds starting to build, just try not to go over another high pass if you can help it. When you get out on the western part of the Colorado Trail, where you're coincided with the CDT there's some extremely long stretches where you're above tree line, and it's kind of hard to plan. I'm kind of losing my train of thought there, but you just kind of go with it, and if you see some storms coming, you try to stay down, but
it sounds like there's not that much you can do, which
kind
of sucks.
When you get into certain stretches there, it's literally 50 miles above tree line, it seems. Not much you can do except hope you don't get too close to it.
That's crazy, honestly. Lightning scares the shit out of me, so that's one thing I'm lightning makes me more nervous than mountain lions or anything else that people might be nervous about. And again, I know your chances are you're not going to get struck, obviously, but that shit makes me really freaking nervous. So
when I was out there, every year there would be a few people struck by lightning on the higher summits out there. I believe the one year there was Mount Bierstadt, which is a pretty popular 14er. A whole group got hit by lightning. There was no deaths, but there was obviously injuries involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hate to hear about it.
Yeah.
Dude, we're kind of getting towards the end of the episode now. For the record, I did a very thorough job of reminding Troy to have a story for the end of the episode. So pat myself on the back for that one. Dude, let's hear what you got. End of the episode story, Trail Tales. Let's do it.
All right. Since we're on the Colorado Trail, this actually happened while I was on the Colorado Trail.
Don't tell me it involves lightning.
No lightning this time.
Okay, good.
But it was in 2000, and not too far from the start from Denver, you get into the wilderness area called Lost Creek Wilderness, I believe it's called. And I remember sitting along the trail, having lunch or something, and hearing squirrels chattering at you. They kind of, I don't know what kind of squirrel they were, but they were kind of noisy. So I didn't think anything of it. I was hiking along a little bit later, and I heard some more chattering, assuming it was a squirrel. And next thing I know, out of nowhere, something drilled me on the top of the head. I mean, it felt like a bowling ball fell out of a tree and hit me in the head. I was literally seeing stars. So I kind of like shook my head, got my composure, and I hear the squawking, and it turns out flying away from me is a hawk. A goshawk had flown down. I assume it had a nest nearby and attacked me. And it actually put a pretty good gash on the top of my head.
Oh, no.
So I see this bird standing on another branch staring at me, looking at me in the eye, squawking again. And it comes back, and I was in the wilderness, so I didn't want to get hit in the eyes or something where I'd be seriously injured.
Yeah.
So I kind of ducked down and put my poles above my head, and it flew into the poles that second time. But after having a bloody head at this point, I didn't want to get hit again. Even though it's just a small hawk, I decided to get out of there because, again, it already cut my head open. I didn't want it to hit me in the eyes or something like that.
Yeah.
But of all the time in the wild, that's the only animal attack that, besides like a bee or something, that caused any damage.
Damn, that's crazy. Yeah, I guess those things can be kind of brutal, huh?
Well, I know they're pretty defensive of their nest compared to other birds of prey.
I was going to say, I wonder why it swooped you like that.
In my past, I've had a couple experiences where they've swooped me, but never one actually followed through and hit me.
Well, that thing must have been having a bad day. Jeez.
Yeah, I don't know. But I was wearing a hat. It didn't put a hole in the hat, but I had a pretty good cut on the top of my head, which I don't know how I managed that, but of all the animals I encountered, that one truly scared me when it looked me in the eye back a second shot.
Especially, it's like coming from above you too, so it's like, I don't know. Yeah, that's at first is kind of funny. I can see how it's like kind of sketchy, but it is kind of funny too. I don't know.
Well, they're a pretty big bird. They're on par with a red-tailed hawk in size, so it's a substantial hawk, probably 20 inches tall. So
oh wow! Jeez.
When it's coming at you, and you see it coming at you at point blank range, it's pretty intimidating.
Yeah, dude, I bet. Jeez, I've actually never once have I ever thought about what it might be like, because obviously as hikers, we fantasize about like, oh, what would happen if I got attacked by a bear or a mountain lion, whatever. But I've never thought about a freaking bird like that. You'd like fucking A, like, or just like, yeah, something coming at me from the air instead of on the ground. That's nuts.
Yeah,
That's
and I'm not
nuts.
exaggerating it. Like, best thing I compare to is like feeling a bowling ball getting dropped on your head. I mean, it hurt.
Yeah, man, I bet. Jeez. Well, I'm glad you're okay. And thank you for doing this, Troy. I really appreciate it. Thank you for reaching out.
Yep, thanks for having me.
This was a lot of fun. Why don't you go ahead and plug your blog or any social media you want to do? Where can people find you and check out your stuff at? Yeah, if you find any of my stories interesting, you can look at my blog. It's tomcatsadventures.com. It's called Tomcat's Outdoor Adventures, and there's also a Facebook page, Tomcat's Outdoor Adventures. Awesome. I'll have a link to that, to the blog in the show notes. And that's going to do it, everybody. Thanks for listening. Yeah, have a good one. Hey.